After detailed detective work, experts now believe this is the only surviving piece of clothing worn by Elizabeth I.
Elizabeth I ruled England for over 4 decades and shaped the course of history with her decisions. Her sudden death in 1603 was surrounded by mystery that no one could fully explain. For centuries, questions remained about what truly killed the Virgin Queen. Was it age, illness, or something else that had gone unnoticed? Now, recent advancements in DNA analysis have finally given scientists the shocking answers. What they discovered does not just explain her death. It forces us to look at her entire reign in a new way. A mask of power. Elizabeth came to the throne in 1558, at the age of 25. At that time, the idea of a woman ruling alone was almost impossible to accept. England had just experienced the turbulent reign of her half-sister Mary Tudor, remembered for religious violence and instability. Many at home and abroad doubted Elizabeth's ability to govern without a husband to guide her. Spain, France, and Rome all viewed her as vulnerable, and inside her own kingdom, nobles questioned her legitimacy and strength. Elizabeth quickly realized that her survival as queen depended not only on her policies, but on how she was seen. She understood that image was power. Unlike male rulers who could rely on physical force or military experience to command respect, Elizabeth had to craft a symbol that made her untouchable. She needed to project purity, authority, and eternal youth. To achieve this, she built what became known as her mask of youth. This was not just a fashion choice. It was a political strategy designed to erase weakness and convince subjects that the Queen was above ordinary human flaws. The most visible part of this mask was her makeup. Elizabeth's face became her battlefield, and her weapon of choice was Venetian ceruse, a mixture of white lead and vinegar. It gave her skin a striking pale color that immediately set her apart from others. In the 16th century, pale skin was associated with nobility, wealth, and power because it signified a life lived indoors rather than in the fields. For Elizabeth, the effect went even further. It allowed her to appear untouched by age, illness, or hardship. In the public eye, she looked ageless and almost otherworldly. Her dependence on makeup increased dramatically after 1562, when she contracted smallpox. Elizabeth survived, but the disease left her with scars on her face. From that point forward, she used heavier layers of makeup to cover the damage. The thicker the makeup became, the more she disappeared beneath it. Reports from her later years describe her makeup as being so heavy that it could be nearly an inch thick, giving her face the appearance of porcelain. This mask extended beyond cosmetics. Elizabeth controlled every visual representation of herself. In an age before photography, portraits were the main way her image reached the public. She was acutely aware of their power. Only paintings that portrayed her as young, flawless, and strong were allowed. In 1596, she issued what historians call the Royal Proclamation on Portraits, which ordered that unflattering images of her be destroyed. Artists were instructed to follow approved templates, such as the Darnley portrait from 1575, which showed her smooth-skinned and regal. Even as she aged, official portraits continued to present her as timeless. By combining makeup and strict portrait control, Elizabeth created an image that became inseparable from her rule. The mask told her subjects that the Queen did not age, did not weaken, and did not bend. It was a powerful illusion that kept her authority intact. But beneath it all, her body was paying a hidden, costly price that science would reveal ran deeper than anyone in her court could have imagined. The Queen's final months of suffering. As Elizabeth approached her 70th year, the powerful image she had carefully cultivated for decades began to crumble. For most of her reign, she had seemed untouchable, a monarch of extraordinary intelligence, strength, and resolve. She had defeated the Spanish Armada, maintained England's stability amid religious turmoil, and shaped the nation's identity as an emerging power. To her people, she was the Virgin Queen, a figure above human frailty. Yet behind closed doors, her final months were far darker. Frail in body, weary in mind, and emotionally drained, she had become a shadow of the woman she once was. Her inner circle had thinned with time. Most of her oldest and most trusted allies were gone. William Cecil, her chief advisor, had died in 1598. Francis Walsingham, the mastermind behind her intelligence network, had passed years earlier. The loss of Catherine Howard, her lady-in-waiting and closest female confidant, left her painfully isolated. Above all, the memory of Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, haunted her. She had adored him, showing him rare warmth, but when his rebellion failed in 1601, she was forced to sign his death warrant. His execution remained one of the most agonizing decisions of her reign. Though she tried to convince herself it was necessary for the safety of the state, the act haunted her until the end. Sir Robert Carey, her cousin, later recounted that Elizabeth broke down in tears when recalling another execution that had marked her rule. She insisted, with the last of her strength, that she had never truly consented to the death of Mary, Queen of Scots. Whether true or not, her words revealed how deeply the weight of her past pressed upon her after decades of decisive rule, regrets, and grief now consumed her. Elizabeth's emotional collapse led her to retreat entirely from public life. The Queen, once quick-witted and confident in speech, now barely spoke. She refused even basic care, rejecting help to bathe, eat, or dress. Doctors were dismissed, medicines refused, and much of her time was spent in silence. Her meticulously maintained image fell apart alongside her health. Her decline was unmistakable. Teeth blackened and decayed, painful abscesses swollen in her jaw and gums, making eating and speaking agonizing neck glands filled with pus caused constant discomfort. Years of lead-based makeup and mercury treatments likely poisoned her blood. Her skin turned gray. Sores erupted across her body, and her once red hair thinned to the point that wigs were required. Courtiers noticed the changes, but dared not speak, fearing her wrath. In her final weeks, her behavior grew more alarming. She abandoned her bed, preferring cushions or standing for long stretches, possibly afraid she would not rise again. She refused food, water, and medicine, weakening rapidly. Just weeks before her death, she collapsed, remaining silent for 4 days. Courtiers whispered among themselves, unsure of what to do. None dared speak her name or admit the truth. The Queen was dying. One of the most harrowing signs of her condition appeared when doctors examined her coronation ring, worn since 1559 as a symbol of her reign and marriage to the kingdom. The skin beneath had swelled so much that the gold band cut painfully into her flesh. It could not be removed without injury. The swelling revealed serious circulation problems, a clear sign her body was failing. The Virgin Queen, who had built her life around showing no weakness, refused to let anyone witness her surrender. That refusal made her final days not only excruciating, but profoundly tragic. She was dying, and she would not allow herself, or anyone else, to admit it. Elizabeth's final hours, death, and burial. On March 24, 1603, Queen Elizabeth I passed away at Richmond Palace at the age of 69. Her death marked the end of an extraordinary era in English history. She had ruled for 45 years, guiding her kingdom through wars, political turmoil, and religious upheaval. Yet in the end, she died quietly, without ceremony or fanfare. No official cause of death was ever recorded. Elizabeth had firmly forbidden a post-mortem examination, a final act to protect the carefully crafted image she had spent a lifetime building. The news of her passing shocked the kingdom. Few had expected it, even though she had grown visibly frail in the months leading up to her death. In her final hours, she was silent and left behind no last words. There was no public farewell. The quiet surrounding her death felt haunting, as if the woman who had commanded every room she entered had chosen to depart the world without explanation. Her body was transported to Westminster Abbey, where she was laid to rest in a grand tomb. With Elizabeth's death, the Tudor dynasty came to an end. For decades, she had refused to marry or name an heir, leaving countless questions about the crown's future. Now, with her passing, a new monarch was poised to take the throne. James VI of Scotland would soon become James I of England, uniting the crowns of both nations and beginning a new royal chapter. On paper, the transition of power was smooth, but the public mourned deeply. Their queen, the only ruler many had ever known, was gone. The silence she left behind created fertile ground for stories, doubts, and conspiracies. In the months and years that followed, those myths only grew stronger. Some of the most striking tales came from Elizabeth Southwell, one of the Queen's ladies-in-waiting. She claimed that after Elizabeth was buried, her body burst open inside the coffin, releasing foul vapors. At the time, many dismissed this as propaganda spread by Jesuits who opposed Elizabeth's Protestant rule. For centuries, historians treated it as rumor, yet modern science suggests Southwell may have been describing something real. A body weakened by disease or poisoning can decompose faster than normal. When sealed in a coffin, the gases from decomposition have nowhere to escape, and in rare cases, pressure can cause the coffin to rupture, what is now called exploding casket syndrome. Other accounts painted Elizabeth as having given up on life in her final weeks. Attendants reported that she refused food, medicine, and even her bed, instead spending long days seated on cushions. Some believed she willed herself to die, consumed by grief, regret, and exhaustion. At the time, such an act was considered deeply disturbing. Even sinful rumors also spread across Catholic Europe that she had been poisoned by her own courtiers, perhaps to clear the way for James VI of Scotland. Poison was a constant fear in Tudor politics, and the unusual nature of her decline made the story believable. The mystery was compounded by the limited medical knowledge of the time. Doctors lacked tools like blood tests, imaging scans, or the ability to detect poisoning. Their understanding of disease and toxins was rudimentary at best. For centuries, people could only speculate about what truly happened to Elizabeth. But 400 years later, modern science would begin to shed light on the truth. A modern autopsy on a 400-year-old mystery. In a stunning episode of Sky History's Royal Autopsy, a team of leading experts used modern forensic science to reopen one of the great medical mysteries of the Tudor era, the cause of death of Queen Elizabeth I. With the help of Home Office pathologist Dr. Brett Lockyer and acclaimed biological anthropologist Professor Alice Roberts, the investigation re-examined the final months of Elizabeth's life in a way that had never been done before. Drawing on original historical documents, detailed medical reconstructions, and cutting-edge DNA modeling, the team pieced together a modern profile of the Queen's health. Their goal was not only to understand what killed her, but to uncover what her body must have endured in those final months. What they found was both deeply human and surprisingly tragic. Dr. Lockyer focused on the Queen's deteriorating dental health. Her surviving portraits and personal records hinted at serious oral problems. Through forensic modeling, he discovered evidence of severe tooth decay, advanced gum disease, and even a large abscess on her jaw. This combination would have caused her unrelenting and worsening pain. Every movement of her mouth, every attempt to speak or eat, would have triggered agony. Dr. Lockyer explained that this kind of infection, untreated in that era, would only grow worse over time, possibly spreading to other parts of her body. Professor Roberts then turned her attention to Elizabeth's cosmetics, especially the thick white paste of Venetian ceruse that had become her signature look. Tests confirmed that this substance was made from lead, one of the most dangerous metals to the human body. Elizabeth had applied it to her skin almost every day for decades. Instead of protecting her image, it was silently destroying her health. Roberts explained that this chronic lead exposure could account for many of the Queen's most disturbing late-life symptoms. Her thinning hair, constant fatigue, fragile teeth, swollen glands, and recurring infections all matched the signs of long-term lead poisoning. Even her bouts of confusion and emotional instability fit the pattern. Elizabeth had built her power on an image of perfection, but behind the mask, her body was breaking down cell by cell. Yet, even with the unbearable dental pain and the hidden effects of lead poisoning, something still seemed to be missing. The team knew there had to be more. They examined the Queen's final recorded symptoms in detail. Among the most concerning signs were her swollen hands and serious respiratory distress. Eyewitness accounts described how she struggled to breathe and appeared extremely fatigued in her final days. It was only when the experts began to connect the dots between these symptoms that a clearer medical picture emerged. And what they uncovered next completely changed the story of Elizabeth's death. The final diagnosis. After carefully examining every symptom and event that led to Queen Elizabeth I's final moments, Dr. Lockyer and his team arrived at an unexpected but definite conclusion: bronchial pneumonia was the direct cause. This dangerous infection caused fluid to fill her lungs, eventually stopping her ability to breathe. As the illness grew worse, it triggered sepsis, a life-threatening condition where bacteria seep into the bloodstream. Her body, already weakened by age and years of hidden physical strain, simply could not fight back. Her heart, drained and failing, could no longer support her. That is what caused her death, Dr. Lockyer explained. The lung infection likely spread throughout her body and led to blood poisoning. Her weakened heart also contributed to her collapse. For centuries, theories had swirled around Elizabeth's death. These long-lasting stories wrapped her final days in mystery and shadows. So, when the ultimate answer pointed to a familiar illness like pneumonia, many felt it seemed almost anticlimactic. Yet, as the researchers dug deeper, what they uncovered was far more disturbing. Elizabeth had suffered quietly through conditions that went well beyond the last infection records show. She stopped eating toward the end. An act that left her frail, dehydrated, and barely able to stand. Her attendants described her hands and feet as swollen, and her skin covered in painful sores. She often sat motionless for long stretches, sometimes entire days, speaking to no one. Witnesses reported her eyes had sunk into her face, and her skin hung loosely from her thin frame. The once fiery queen, who commanded a powerful empire, had become a fragile shadow, fading before the eyes of her court. What shocked the medical team most wasn't simply that pneumonia killed her. It was the amount of agony she must have lived with long before the end arrived. Evidence shows she battled untreated infections, constant discomfort, and deep emotional exhaustion for years. She endured it all in silence, refusing assistance and hiding her failing health behind the commanding image she had maintained for decades. Professor Alice Roberts, who joined the investigation for the Royal Autopsy series, summarized it with stark clarity. This is distressing, not because of her death itself, but because of how much she must have suffered quietly before it. The investigators began their work expecting a dramatic conclusion, something fitting for the intense stories of the Tudor era. But, rather than uncovering a scandal or a conspiracy, they found a more human and heartbreaking truth: pneumonia. A condition that can be easily cured today with modern medicine ended the life of one of the world's most powerful rulers. It was ordinary, it was painful, and it was completely real. By reaching this final determination, the experts did more than solve a centuries-old question. They peeled back the layers of legend to expose something much darker. The Virgin Queen, who built her rule on resilience and control, passed away slowly and painfully, her final days marked by quiet suffering, loneliness, and relentless despair. The Immortal Queen: legacy, myth, and lasting fascination. Elizabeth I didn't just rule England, she turned herself into a legend. Even more than 400 years after her death, her name still stirs debates, admiration, and endless curiosity. Historians, filmmakers, writers, and political thinkers continue to study her not only for what she achieved, but for the remarkable figure she grew into. Her reign marked a defining moment in England's story. The period known as the Golden Age unfolded under her leadership. It was a time when Shakespeare's plays lit up the theaters, English ships began to command the oceans, and the Spanish Armada was defeated in a battle that reshaped Europe's power structure. Yet those triumphs barely explain why she still captivates the world today. Elizabeth grasped something many monarchs never fully understood. Nations survive on the stories they tell just as much as on the armies they build. She didn't just rule the country, she shaped the way it saw itself. When she took the throne, religion was the most dangerous threat facing her. England had swung violently back and forth between Catholic and Protestant rule during the reigns of her father and her siblings. Elizabeth knew that another extreme shift could plunge the kingdom into chaos. So she walked a narrow line, enforcing Protestantism while allowing just enough tolerance to prevent Catholics from rising up. That careful balance helped her achieve stability at a time when many believed civil war was inevitable. Her ability to turn moderation into power has drawn the attention of political thinkers for generations. She also transformed culture in ways that stretched far beyond royal ceremonies. Elizabeth used censorship and control over the printing press to manage her public image. Nothing critical of the Queen was allowed to spread. Every play, pamphlet, or book needed official approval before it reached the public. The result was a society in which her image and the identity of the nation became tightly linked. She wasn't simply a monarch. She became the living symbol of England itself. Her refusal to name a successor until her final days further deepened her aura. For years, nobles, foreign envoys, and even her closest advisors worried constantly about who would claim the crown after her. By leaving the question unanswered, she kept everyone dependent on her. As long as Elizabeth remained alive, she was the one unshakable pillar of English politics. That intentional mystery became part of her myth, proving she could outmaneuver even her sharpest opponents. Yet the cost of her decisions made her story both triumphant and heartbreaking. Staying unmarried gave her unmatched authority, but left her profoundly alone. Keeping power to herself meant she bore every burden without sharing the weight. Her strict control over her reputation protected her rule, but it also forced her to live behind a flawless mask that allowed no vulnerability. Even her refusal to name an heir kept the kingdom unsettled, with everyone forced to rely on her as the single force holding everything together. This blend of intelligence, strategy, sacrifice, and iron self-control explains why Elizabeth continues to command such fascination. She wasn't only a ruler of her own era, she became a symbol that endured long after her life ended. The interest in her life and death isn't only tied to her victories, but also to the immense cost of becoming immortal in the world's memory. So what do you think about Elizabeth's death? Did learning the truth change your image of her? Or did it make her feel more human? Share your thoughts with us in the comments. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.